Real estate is always sold as the magic tax hack. So today, we're covering what it actually takes to turn real estate into an immediate tax benefit. People say, buy a rental, rack up some paper losses, and suddenly, no more taxes, right? At least that's what Cousin Bob says. And Cousin Bob might be your uncle, a realtor with a ring light, or that mortgage banker on Instagram who swears he has cracked the IRS code. The problem is, Bob can't even read his own tax return, never mind yours, and Congress has built 3 massive hurdles between you and those real estate deductions. Miss even one and the IRS can shut it all down. I'm Jasmine DiLucci. I'm a practicing tax attorney, CPA, and enrolled agent. I got my first tax license in high school. And today we're cutting through the half-baked real estate tax advice floating around online or at your family gatherings. Yes, real estate can deliver real tax benefits, but only if you legally clear 3 critical hurdles. And you never knew tax law could be this sexy, because today we are going over basis limitations, yes, at-risk limitations, hell yeah, and passive loss limitations, so you can tell Cousin Bob his energy is better spent whipping up dessert, not whipping up fake tax law. Let's start with the big picture. People love real estate because it usually goes up in value. Yet, for tax purposes, we have this thing called depreciation that gives us a tax benefit as if the property is going down in value. That's amazing, right? But decades ago, so many people thought it was amazing that they created huge paper losses in ways Congress never intended. So Congress stepped in and built hurdles between you and those deductions. The very first hurdle, basis limitations. Okay, in plain English, basis just means your actual investment in the property. Think about it this way. If you and a partner each put in $50,000 to buy a $100,000 property, Congress doesn't want either of you taking more than $50,000 in losses each, because beyond that, you would be deducting losses that economically belong to the other partner. Now let's raise the stakes. Suppose you both invest $50,000, but you also take on $900,000 of debt to buy a $1 million property. For tax purposes, that debt is split between you. So each of you now has up to $500,000 of basis to work with. Why? Because you're each considered economically responsible for your share of the debt. And for a while, that was the end of the story. Basis was the only hurdle, but because too many taxpayers were taking paper losses for real estate secured by non-recourse loans without personal liability, Congress added the next hurdle, which is hurdle number 2. At-risk limitations. And in plain English, the at-risk rules say debt doesn't always count unless you're truly on the hook. If you don't personally have skin in the game, like personal liability, then you don't get to take the loss. Now, real estate gets one big exception. The technical term is qualified non-recourse financing. That's when a qualified lender, like a bank or government agency, finances the property and their only recourse is the property itself. In that case, even without personal liability, if you meet several requirements, the IRS lets you treat it as at risk. But let's look at when people run into trouble. For example, there are a lot of real estate gurus pushing subject to mortgages. Sounds great economically. You get to take over payments on an existing bank loan and the loan remains in the seller's name. But here's the tax problem. The loan is not between you and the bank and you're not personally liable to the bank, so it doesn't qualify as qualified non-recourse financing or as recourse debt. Translation, you're not at risk, which means you can't meet the hurdle to deduct the losses. Now, let's say you've made it this far. You're thinking, these hurdles are easy. Jasmine, what is the big deal? Well, let's go over hurdle number 3. This is where most real estate losses go to die, and it's called passive loss limitations. Congress says, even if you have basis and even if you're at risk, we still don't want you using those losses against your salary or other business income unless you're actively in the business of real estate with very specific requirements, and that's what we call real estate professional status. In addition, there is one more carve-out, the short-term rental exception. If your property has an average stay of 7 days or less, Congress figured the level of hands-on management looked more like a business than a passive rental. So then you won't be subject to the heightened passive loss limitations for real estate. And of course, back in 1986, Airbnb didn't exist, so they probably didn't anticipate today's short-term rental market. So unless you qualify as a real estate professional or meet a short-term rental exception, your losses can usually only be offset by other passive income, and most people don't have much passive income. That means those losses just pile up year after year until you finally have enough passive income to use them, or you only get to use them when you sell the property. So where does that leave you? If you're serious about using real estate tax benefits, here's the checklist. Okay, track your basis. Know how much you've actually invested and how debt is allocated, which is not always evenly divided by partners like in our example. 2, confirm whether your debt makes you truly at risk, especially if you're using creative financing. And 3, plan around the passive loss rules, okay, which means if you're aiming for significant immediate tax benefits, understand what it takes to qualify as a real estate professional or use the short-term rental exception. So that's the real roadmap. And if you want to go deeper into the exact law, real court cases, and step-by-step examples, join my free community where I've got a full workshop on short-term rentals and a full workshop on real estate professional status waiting for you.